Dyatlov Incident Case Pass is one of those real-life events that seem like a movie script, but which remain without a fully conclusive explanation to this day. On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced mountaineers were camped on the slopes of Kholat Mountain, Syakhl, in the Ural Mountains under the leadership of Igor Dyatlov. They were not amateurs. They were trained young people, accustomed to facing extreme cold, strong winds, and long expeditions in harsh conditions. Nothing in previous records indicated fear or any sign that something was wrong. On the contrary, the diaries and photos show a confident, relaxed group prepared for the challenge. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. During the night, something happened, and it was something so urgent that it forced everyone inside the tent to make an extreme decision: to cut the fabric from the inside and immediately go outside, facing temperatures close to -30 degrees. They left behind boots, heavy coats, and essential equipment. There was no time to think. There was no time to prepare. Just go out. Weeks later, when rescue teams finally found the site, the scene seemed impossible to explain. The tent was partially covered in snow and torn from the inside out. Footprints indicated that the group had descended the slope in a relatively organized manner, suggesting that they were not completely panicked, but rather making a quick and deliberate decision. This makes it all the more strange, because if it had been an immediate attack or something chaotic, total disorder would have been expected, not a coordinated movement. The bodies began to be found in different parts of the mountain. Some were near a wooded area where they apparently tried to light a fire to survive. Others were scattered along the path back to the tent, as if they had tried to return but couldn't. Many died of hypothermia, which was expected in the extreme conditions, but some presented injuries that didn't make sense. Severe internal fractures in the skull and thorax, comparable to high-energy impacts, but without proportional external signs. One of the victims, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found without her tongue and with severe facial damage. Unusual levels of radiation were detected in some of her clothing. For decades, countless theories have emerged attempting to explain what happened that night. Secret military experiments, unknown weapons, paranormal phenomena, even sightings of lights in the sky have been mentioned. The problem is that none of these theories could explain all the elements at once. There was always something that didn't fit. In recent years, more modern studies have begun to point to a more plausible explanation based on physical analysis and computer simulations. The most widely accepted hypothesis involves a slab avalanche, a specific type of snowslide that does not behave like classic avalanches. This type of avalanche can occur silently, releasing a compact layer of snow that exerts enormous pressure on a localized area. The tent was pitched on a sloping part of the hillside, where snow had already accumulated unstably. During the night, a combination of wind, slope, and snow layers may have caused this slab to shift. It wasn't a gigantic avalanche, but it was enough to put pressure on the tent, cause structural damage, and create an immediate sense of imminent danger. Faced with this, the group made an emergency decision: to leave as quickly as possible, without wasting time on equipment. This explains why they cut the tent open from the inside and got out immediately. It also explains why they were poorly dressed and why some suffered internal compression injuries. After getting out, they descended the slope, trying to get away from the risk of another landslide. However, as they moved away from the tent, they lost access to the equipment that would have ensured their survival. Some tried to improvise shelter near the trees, others tried to return, but the extreme cold, darkness, and hostile terrain made this virtually impossible. Even so, this explanation doesn't resolve everything. There are still points that remain unsettling. Why did some return towards the tent knowing the risk? What exactly caused certain specific injuries? And how did such an experienced group end up in such a rapidly irreversible situation? Perhaps the most unsettling answer is that there wasn't a single factor, but a chain reaction of events. A tent placement error, unstable snow conditions, a decision made under extreme pressure, and an environment where any mistake could cost a life. It wasn't something supernatural. It wasn't an impossible event. It was a real, plausible situation, and yet completely out of control. And that's precisely what makes the case so disturbing even today, because it shows that even with experience, preparation, and intelligence, there are times when the environment simply wins. What the rescuers found at the scene only made the mystery even more disturbing. The mountaineers' equipment was organized inside the tent, as if it had been hastily abandoned, but without any attempt to take the essentials for survival. For any experienced rescuer, this made no sense. Why would 9 trained people in sub-zero temperatures cut their own tent from the inside instead of simply opening the entrance? And why would they leave behind coats, boots, and food, items that were literally within reach? The footprints in the snow showed that at least 8 or 9 people had left together, but something even stranger caught their attention. Many of these marks were from bare feet, wearing only socks or even a single shoe. The group descended the slope towards a forested area about a kilometer away, and it was there that the first bodies were found. 2 of them were under a large tree, practically naked, with their hands bruised as if they had desperately tried to climb or peel the bark off the tree. Nearby, there were signs of an improvised campfire that clearly hadn't lasted long. Between the tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found along the hillside. They appeared to be trying to return. Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin fell at different points, as if they had lost strength one by one on the way back to shelter. Slobodin had a skull fracture, but nothing that fully explained his death beyond exposure to extreme cold. The search continued for weeks until, in May, the thaw revealed the remaining bodies in a deeper ravine in the forest. These 4 were better dressed, wearing clothes taken from their deceased companions, indicating an attempt at survival. But their condition was even more disturbing. One had a crushed skull, another had his chest compressed with a force comparable to a car accident, and one of the victims had broken ribs, as well as the absence of his tongue and parts of his face. The strangest thing is that despite this severe internal damage, there were almost no proportional external signs, which left even the doctors without an explanation. To make matters worse, some items of clothing showed traces of radiation. Although there are possible explanations for this, the isolated and remote context of the region made this detail fuel even more doubt. In the end, all 9 bodies were recovered, but no clear answers emerged. Why did they abandon the tent? Why did some freeze to death while others suffered extreme trauma? And what could cause such specific injuries without leaving obvious external marks? The official investigation only deepened the mystery. 5 died from hypothermia, but 4 presented injuries inconsistent with simple causes. Investigators acknowledged that they could not fully explain what had happened. The absence of external marks, the lack of signs of struggle, and the nature of the injuries made the case extremely unusual. Still, the final conclusion was vague. The mountaineers died due to an unknown and irresistible natural force. This ambiguous ending brought no relief to the families or the public. On the contrary, it opened the door to decades of speculation. Reports of strange lights in the sky, theories involving secret military tests, aerial explosions, and even inexplicable phenomena began to circulate. None of these hypotheses managed to explain all the elements at once, but each seemed to fit a piece of the puzzle. Dyatlov case became something bigger than a simple accident. It became a reflection of human doubt in the face of the unknown. Even with modern studies suggesting natural causes such as specific avalanches or extreme wind and pressure events, there are still details that resist any complete explanation. And that is precisely what keeps this episode alive to this day. The feeling that, on that mountain, that night, something happened. Something we still cannot fully understand. After the bodies were found, the case was quickly closed. The files were sealed. Witnesses were instructed not to discuss details. Officially, the deaths were attributed to an unknown and irresistible force, an expression so vague that it only deepened suspicions. Why would Soviet authorities leave the case so open to interpretation unless there was something to hide? Some even suggested that the excursionists were mistaken for spies or accidentally killed during military maneuvers, and that the government had concealed the truth. In a Cold War scenario marked by paranoia, it wasn't hard to imagine 9 ordinary students becoming collateral victims of the secrecy machine. While theories involving UFOs and military cover-ups fueled the imagination, later researchers sought explanations based on the natural environment of the Urals. One hypothesis involved katabatic winds, sudden and extremely strong gusts that descend mountain slopes at frightening speeds. These winds have been recorded in polar regions, capable of destroying camps and killing explorers. If one of these gusts had hit the Dyatlov camp, the hikers might have had only seconds to react, tearing the tent from the inside to escape a possible burial or collapse. A related theory involves infrasound, low-frequency vibrations generated when wind passes through mountains. Although inaudible, infrasound can cause dizziness, nausea, and an intense feeling of dread. A study suggested that hikers exposed to infrasound generated by the shape of Mount Kholat Syakhl They may have panicked and fled during the night without boots or coats. These environmental theories help explain the seemingly irrational behavior, why experienced mountaineers would abandon their shelter in lethal conditions, and are aligned with known meteorological phenomena. Still, they don't fully explain the severe injuries found on some of the bodies. A strong wind can disorient, but it doesn't crush rib cages or fracture skulls. In the early days of the investigation, suspicion fell on the Mansai, the indigenous people who lived and hunted in the region. Could the hikers have trespassed on sacred land and provoked a violent reaction? The theory was quickly dismissed. The Mansi participated in the search and expressed sorrow for the tragedy. There were no signs of human attack, no defensive wounds or weapon marks. Still, the possibility of human conflict remained in the imagination of some. The hypothesis of an animal attack was also considered. Bears and wolves inhabited the region, but there were no footprints around the tent or the bodies. The cuts in the tent were made from the inside out. They were not claw marks or bites. The absence of Dubinina's tongue and eyes, often sensationalized, was almost certainly the result of natural decomposition and the action of small animals after death, and not evidence of a brutal attack. What made the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbing was not just the deaths, but the lack of answers. Every strange detail, luminous orbs, traces of radiation, internal injuries, missing body parts, seemed to demand an explanation, and lacking clear evidence, theories filled that void. For decades, researchers, journalists, and curious onlookers presented one hypothesis after another, none completely satisfactory, each leaving gaps that another attempted to fill. If none of these theories explained everything, what would be the definitive explanation? The final theory, a plate avalanche. For 60 years, the Dyatlov tragedy remained between folklore and the files of unsolved cases. Each decade brought new theories, from UFOs to secret weapons, yetis, and curses, but none fully explained the facts. Then, in 2019, the Russian government reopened the investigation, and in 2020, after extensive analysis, it announced its conclusion. The hikers died due to a slab avalanche. At first glance, this answer disappointed many. It seemed too commonplace, too simple, after decades of mystery and extraordinary theories. But behind this explanation lay a far more complex and compelling scenario, capable of uniting the strangest details of the case with the relentless logic of nature. Unlike the large avalanches shown in movies, a slab avalanche is discrete, often silent. It occurs when a compact layer of snow breaks off and slides down the slope as a single block. It's like shattering glass. The snow breaks along an invisible, fragile layer, releasing an enormous weight all at once. For mountaineers, this type of avalanche is extremely dangerous, as it occurs without warning and can happen even on relatively gentle slopes. Dyatlov's group camped on the slopes of Mount Kholat. Syakhl had chosen exactly the wrong place. On February 1, 1959, they pitched their tent in an exposed area, just below the summit. It was an unusual decision. Most would have camped further down, protected by the forest. But Dyatlov wanted to train in more challenging conditions. To level the terrain, they dug snow off the slope, destabilizing the structure. Combined with a weaker layer buried below, this created the perfect conditions for disaster. At that moment, there were no signs of danger. The slope was about 30 degrees, considered the limit for avalanches. The group had dinner, chatted, and took photos while the wind blew strongly outside. What they didn't know was that the camp had become a ticking time bomb. For decades, critics of the avalanche theory pointed out that there were no clear signs when rescuers arrived weeks later. The tent was still partially standing, and the snow did not appear to have been deeply displaced. How could an avalanche have occurred without leaving any obvious marks? In 2019, researchers at ETH Zurich re-examined the case using advanced snow mechanics models. The conclusion was surprising. The hikers were likely victims of a delayed plate avalanche. Two scientists, Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzarin, believed that physics could explain what happened. They simulated the dynamics of the snow to see if a small block could cause that result. The challenge was to show how a relatively small avalanche could cause skull and rib fractures without completely burying the victims. To achieve this, they used unexpected technology, software developed by the Disney animation team for the film Frozen, considered some of the most realistic ever created to simulate snow. With these tools, they recreated the mountain conditions of February 1959. The cut made by the hikers weakened the snow. During the night, the wind piled more snow above the tent, increasing the pressure. Hours later, without warning, a slab broke loose and fell directly onto the campsite. Because it was a localized avalanche, it left few traces. In the following weeks, new snowstorms and winds erased any evidence. The impact was enough to crush the tent. Some hikers likely suffered serious injuries immediately. For the others, the priority was escape. Trapped under the collapsed tent, in the dark and extreme cold, they cut the fabric to get out. With some of the group injured and their shelter destroyed, they had to make a difficult decision: stay there or descend into the forest. They chose to descend. Some left without shoes or coats. The footprints found indicate that they did not run in panic, but walked with some calm, trying to reorganize themselves and survive. In the forest, they managed to light a small fire. Branches were broken, some several meters high, indicating that they climbed trees to collect firewood. But the temperature dropped to around 30 degrees Celsius. Without adequate protection, they had no chance. Doroshenko and Krivonischenko were the first to die of hypothermia. Others tried to survive by removing clothes from their bodies. 3 of them, including Dyatlov, tried to return to the tent, but died on the way. The remaining 4 made their way to a ravine, seeking shelter. There, the snow gave way again, burying them under a heavy mass. The pressure crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and left them trapped with no possibility of escape. The avalanche theory connects virtually all the evidence. Crushed bones without significant external injuries, consistent with intense pressure, tent cut from the inside, absence of large avalanche marks, explained by the type of landslide and the time elapsed, radiation on clothing, linked to previous contact with contaminated materials, absence of tongue and eyes, a natural result of decomposition. Even the lights seen in the sky can be explained by Soviet missile tests at the time. If this theory is so compelling, why did it take 60 years to be accepted? Part of the answer lies in human psychology. From the beginning, vague terms like unknown force encouraged speculation. Witnesses were silenced, files were hidden, and rumors grew. In this scenario, extraordinary theories flourished. An avalanche seemed too simple. People resist conventional explanations for unusual events. We want mysteries to remain mysteries. And in the Soviet Union, the culture of secrecy only reinforced suspicions. But science is patient. Over time, as more fanciful theories failed, the avalanche hypothesis gained traction until the evidence became impossible to ignore.